You've been lied to, not by accident, by design. The metric they gave you to measure your intelligence is a cage, and you've been polishing the bars, thinking it's a ladder. They told you intelligence is about knowing things, memorizing facts, repeating theories, collecting degrees like their battle scars. But here's the forensic truth. Knowledge without lethality is just expensive decoration on a corpse. You are not dangerous. You are informed. There's a difference, and that difference is why you're still negotiating when you should be dictating, why you're still explaining when you should be executing, why you're still waiting for the room to respect you, instead of engineering a room where respect is atmospheric, where it's not given, it's assumed, because the alternative is too costly to calculate. Let me paint you a picture of your current operating system. You walk into negotiations already defeated. You telegraph your intentions like a billboard on a highway. You ask for permission from people who have less vision than you, but more audacity. You think being fair is a strategy. You think being reasonable makes you safe. You think if you just work hard enough, if you're just competent enough, if you're just nice enough, the universe will notice and reward you. The universe doesn't notice you. You're invisible, not because you lack talent, not because you lack intelligence, but because you've been weaponizing the wrong arsenal. You've been trained in the doctrine of the sleeper, the person who believes the game is fair, who believes merit rises, who believes good intentions create good outcomes. This is the anesthesia they pumped into you since childhood, and you're still under. You know what makes someone dangerously smart? Not what they know, what they're willing to do with what they know. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago, and they exiled him for it, tortured him for it, banned his book for it. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right in a way that made power uncomfortable. He wrote The Prince not as philosophy, but as a surgical manual, a guide to sovereignty in a world that punishes the naive and rewards the asymmetrical. You're about to get that manual. But here's the contract. This isn't theory. This isn't motivation. This is a doctrine, and doctrine without application is just noise. Most people will watch this, nod along, feel momentarily dangerous, and then return to their sleeper protocols by tomorrow morning. You won't be most people. In a world of sheep, the wolf doesn't announce itself. It simply arrives. Florence, 1513. Niccolò Machiavelli sits in exile, broken, tortured, stripped of position. The Medici family, who he served, who he calculated for, who he maneuvered empires around, turned on him the moment the political wind shifted. They didn't just remove him, they strapped him to the strappato, a medieval torture device that dislocates shoulders, snaps tendons, turns the body into a monument of agony. They wanted him to confess to a conspiracy he didn't commit. He didn't break, not because he was innocent, but because he understood something most people never learn. Your usefulness to power is temporary, but your doctrine is eternal. They could destroy his body. They couldn't touch his lethality. So he wrote, not from a palace, not from a university, from a farmhouse in the Italian countryside, wearing the same clothes every day, eating cheap food, watching his relevance evaporate in real time. And in that abyss, he penned the most dangerous book ever written about power, The Prince. Not a book about being good, a book about being effective. He didn't write it for the masses. He wrote it for Lorenzo de' Medici, the man whose family tortured him, as a job application, a demonstration of ruthless clarity. It didn't work. Lorenzo ignored it. Machiavelli died irrelevant, broke, and exiled, but the book survived. And for 500 years, it's been the ghost operating system behind every regime, every empire, Every leader who understood that morality is a luxury, afforded only to those who've already secured power. The Catholic Church banned it. Political philosophers condemned it. Philosophers called it evil. Why? Because Machiavelli removed the anesthesia. He said what everyone in power already knew but would never admit. The world doesn't reward virtue. It rewards leverage. It doesn't punish cruelty. It punishes ineffective cruelty. It doesn't care about your intentions. It measures your outcomes. He was the only one honest enough to stare into the abyss and write down what stared back. You're about to enter that same abyss. These aren't tips. These are laws. Violate them and you remain a pawn. Master them and you become the architect of the board itself. The sheep is safe until the wolf arrives. The wolf is safe until it forgets it's a wolf. You wait too long. You see the threat. You do nothing. You tell yourself it's not the right time, that maybe it'll resolve itself, that confrontation is messy and you're above messy. So you wait. You monitor. You hope. And while you're hoping, the threat is metastasizing, building alliances, consolidating resources, studying your patterns. By the time you act, you're not eliminating a threat. You're fighting a war you've already lost. Machiavelli observed this in Chapter 3 when he dissected why the Romans dominated and why the French failed. The Romans had a simple doctrine: eliminate future threats while they're still small. When they conquered a territory, they didn't wait for rebellion to brew. They didn't hope for loyalty. They planted colonies, dismantled rival power structures, executed potential insurgents before they became actual insurgents. The French did the opposite. They negotiated. They made deals. They tried to be fair. They believed goodwill would create stability. It didn't. It created future battlefields. According to Machiavelli, men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries. Of more serious ones, they cannot. Therefore, the injury that is to be done to a man ought to be of such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge. He meant that half measures create enemies, full measures create silence. Here's your mirror test. Who in your ecosystem is a future rival? Not today, not this quarter, but in 18 months, when they've studied your playbook, absorbed your strategies, cultivated your network. Who becomes the knife in your back? You know who they are. You've already flagged them. You've done nothing. That's sleeper behavior. You're waiting for the threat to prove itself before you act, which means you're letting them choose the battlefield. Sovereignty doesn't wait for proof. It operates on probability. Audit your ecosystem. Identify asymmetrical threats. People with overlapping ambition, adjacent skill sets, access to your leverage points. Don't attack them. That's crude. Make them irrelevant. Cut off their resource streams. Redirect their alliances. Reposition yourself so that by the time they move, the board has already shifted and their move lands in empty space. This isn't cruelty. It's architecture. You're not destroying them. You're ensuring they never have the capacity to destroy you. Preemptive elimination isn't about paranoia. It's about refusing to fight wars that could have been prevented with a single, calculated move 18 months ago. Wolves don't wait for the hunt to come to them. They position themselves where the hunt has no choice but to arrive. You have a vision. It's brilliant. No one cares. Not because your vision lacks merit, but because vision without force is just performance art. You think if you articulate it well enough, if you build the perfect pitch deck, if you inspire people with your passion, they'll follow you into the abyss. They won't. People don't follow vision. They follow power. Machiavelli dissected this in Chapter 6 when he compared armed prophets to unarmed prophets. Armed prophets Moses, Cyrus, Romulus reshaped civilizations. Unarmed prophets, Savonarola, got burned at the stake. The difference wasn't the quality of the vision. It was the capacity to enforce it. Machiavelli once said, "All armed prophets have conquered, and the unarmed ones have been destroyed." Why? Because human nature is conditional. People support you when it's beneficial. They abandon you the moment the cost exceeds the reward. If your vision depends on their goodwill, you've built an empire on sand. The second the wind shifts, they're gone. Armed prophets don't ask for belief. They create conditions where belief is the only rational option. Moses didn't convince the Israelites to follow him through charisma alone. He had God's plagues, divine authority, and the threat of annihilation for disobedience. Cyrus didn't unite Persia through persuasion. He had armies, resources, and the infrastructure to punish defection. Savonarola? Brilliant orator, visionary reformer, unarmed, dead. Here's your mirror test. What happens to your vision if the people who believe in it wake up tomorrow and decide they don't? What leverage do you have? What enforcement mechanism exists? If the answer is none, you're not a leader. You're a performer waiting for the audience to get bored. Weaponize your vision. Build enforcement infrastructure before you need it. This doesn't mean literal violence. It means creating dependencies, controlling resource allocation, positioning yourself as the irreplaceable node in the network. Make it so that abandoning your vision costs more than supporting it. Stop asking people to believe in you. Engineer conditions where belief is automatic. Lock in contracts. Control distribution. Own the platform. Don't just have the best idea. Have the only executable idea. The armed prophet doesn't need to convince anyone. The market has no choice but to bend toward them, because all other options have been systematically neutralized. Vision without force is poetry. Force without vision is chaos. The sovereign has both, and never confuses one for the other. You want to be liked. That need is killing you, slowly. You make decisions based on how they'll be perceived, instead of what outcome they'll produce. You soften the blow. You compromise. You try to make everyone comfortable with the transition. And in doing so, you create a slow-motion disaster. A half-executed strategy that satisfies no one and accomplishes nothing. Cesare Borgia didn't have that problem. Machiavelli studied him like a surgeon studies anatomy, and what he found was lethality distilled into doctrine. Borgia inherited the Romagna, a fractured, chaotic territory filled with rival warlords, corrupt officials, and a population that trusted no one. He needed order, fast, so he appointed Ramiro de Orco, a brutal, efficient enforcer, and gave him absolute authority. De Orco crushed the chaos, executed rivals, installed fear-based compliance. The Romagna stabilized. Then Borgia did something most leaders lack the stomach for. He killed De Orco, cut him in half, displayed the body in the public square. Why? Because De Orco had become the symbol of cruelty. The population hated him. So Borgia gave them a scapegoat, blamed all the brutality on De Orco, executed him publicly, and positioned himself as the liberator who removed the tyrant. Machiavelli's observation. This brought him the greatest reputation. The people were at once satisfied and stupefied. Borgia used cruelty with surgical precision, then erased the evidence of his own hand in it. He got compliance and love. He stabilized the region and avoided blame. That's not cruelty, that's art. Here's your mirror test. Are you avoiding necessary pain because you're afraid of how it'll make you look? Are you dragging out a decision that should have been executed in one clean cut? Are you trying to be both the enforcer and the friend? You can't be both. Not effectively. Identify the painful transition your organization, your business, your life requires. Stop softening it. Execute it swiftly, completely, and if necessary, through a proxy. Let someone else absorb the hatred. Then, once the dust settles, reposition yourself as the architect of the new order, the one who fixed the mess. This is Borgia's scalpel. Cruelty concentrated into a single moment, attributed elsewhere, followed by magnanimity. You get the outcome without the long-term resentment. Most leaders fail because they're cruel slowly. Death by 1,000 cuts, drawn-out firings, gradual restructuring. That's not mercy, that's cowardice. It maximizes suffering and minimizes results. The sovereign cuts once, deep, clean, and never apologizes for the surgery that saved the patient. The scalpel doesn't ask permission, it simply knows where to cut. You think cruelty is binary. It's not. There's effective cruelty and ineffective cruelty, and the difference between them is the difference between sovereignty and chaos. Most people avoid cruelty altogether because they've been conditioned to believe it's inherently wrong. Others deploy it recklessly, constantly, and wonder why their empire collapses from within. Both are operating with broken instruments. Machiavelli dissected this in Chapter 8 when he analyzed Agathocles, a Sicilian who rose from potter's son to tyrant through calculated brutality. Agathocles didn't shy away from violence. He murdered the Senate. He executed rivals. He seized power through what anyone would call evil means. But here's what separated him from common tyrants. He understood the mathematics of cruelty. Machiavelli's formula: cruelties are well committed when they are done at a stroke, out of the necessity to secure oneself, and thereafter not persisted in, but converted into the greatest possible benefit to the subjects. Translation: cruelty must be concentrated, not distributed. It must be surgical, not chronic. It must serve a strategic endpoint, not your emotional state. Agathocles committed his cruelties once, swift, total, absolute. Then he stopped. He shifted to governance, stability, prosperity. His subjects got security. He got compliance. The cruelty became a historical footnote, not an operational protocol. Compare that to leaders who deploy cruelty continuously. Petty punishments, constant surveillance, death by 1,000 cuts. They think they're establishing dominance. They're actually creating insurgencies. Chronic cruelty doesn't produce fear. It produces resentment, and resentment metastasizes into revolution. Here's your mirror test. When you exert force, when you fire someone, when you cut off a partnership, when you eliminate a competitor, are you doing it cleanly, or are you dragging it out? Are you making an example once, or are you constantly reminding people of your power? If you're constantly reminding them, you don't have power. You have insecurity masquerading as authority. Audit your use of force. Identify where you need to exert pressure, then concentrate it into a single decisive action. Don't threaten repeatedly. Execute once. Don't punish incrementally. Remove the problem entirely. And once the cruelty is complete, immediately shift to magnanimity. This is the cruelty calculus. Severity times speed divided by frequency equals sustainable dominance. High severity, high speed, low frequency. That's the formula. Agathocles killed the Senate in one night, then spent decades building Syracuse into a fortress. He didn't keep killing senators every quarter to send a message. The first message was sufficient because it was total. The amateur spreads cruelty across time, hoping repetition creates compliance. The sovereign concentrates it into a single moment, then converts the aftermath into prosperity. One creates enemies, the other creates empires. Cruelty without mathematics is just violence. Violence without endpoint is just chaos. The sovereign calculates both, then never calculates again. You live in two worlds, the world as it is, the world as people say it is, and the gap between those two worlds is where your leverage lives, or where your delusions kill you. Most people operate in the second world. They believe the narratives. They follow the stated rules. They think the game is played the way the rulebook says it's played. It's not. Machiavelli identified this fracture in chapter 15, and it's the most dangerous insight in The Prince. There is such a difference between how men live and how they ought to live, that he who abandons what is done for what ought to be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation. Read that again. He's saying the gap between ideal behavior and actual behavior is a kill zone. If you operate based on how people should act, if you trust stated intentions, if you believe corporate value statements, if you think people will honor their word because it's the right thing to do, you're not strategic. You're suicidal. The world rewards those who see reality clearly, not those who see it nobly. You've been taught to be generous, to be honest, to be merciful, to keep your word. And all of those are beautiful virtues in a world that doesn't exist. In the actual world, generosity without leverage makes you a resource to be extracted. Honesty without discretion makes you predictable. Mercy without calculation makes you weak. Keeping your word when others don't makes you the only one playing by rules that no longer apply. Machiavelli once said, "A man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil." In layman, Machiavelli said, "If you're the only one playing fair, you're not virtuous, you're extinct." Here's your mirror test. How many times have you been burned by assuming good faith? How many partnerships collapsed because you operated on stated intentions instead of revealed behavior? How many times did you trust the contract, the handshake, the culture, only to discover it was decoration on a knife? You keep getting surprised by betrayal because you refuse to close the reality fracture. You keep operating in the world as it should be instead of the world as it is. That's not integrity. That's anesthesia. Start documenting the gap. In every interaction, every negotiation, every partnership. Track what people say versus what they do. Build a forensic map of revealed preferences. Who honors deadlines? Who deflects accountability? Who takes credit? Who delivers? Stop listening to mission statements. Watch resource allocation. Stop believing promises. Track behavioral patterns. Stop trusting stated values. Audit actual incentives. The reality fracture is your advantage if you're willing to see it. While everyone else is swimming in narratives, you're operating on data. While they're shocked by betrayals, you already repositioned 3 moves ago because you saw the fracture and acted accordingly. Machiavelli isn't telling you to be dishonest, cruel, or ruthless by default. He's telling you to recognize when others are and to have the operational flexibility to respond asymmetrically. You don't have to abandon your principles. You have to stop assuming everyone else shares them. The sovereign lives in reality. The sleeper lives in the brochure. One builds empires, the other writes obituaries for dreams that never had a chance because they were based on a world that never existed. The map is not the territory. The brochure is not the building. The stated rule is not the actual game. You want to be loved. That desire is a leash. It controls every decision you make, every boundary you fail to set, every compromise you accept that erodes your position. You think being loved creates loyalty. It doesn't. It creates conditional loyalty. Loyalty that evaporates the moment someone offers your people a better deal, an easier path, a more comfortable alternative. Machiavelli asked the question everyone's afraid to answer honestly. Is it better to be loved than feared, or feared than loved? His answer cuts through 500 years of motivational mythology. One should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved. When of the two, either must be dispensed with. Why? Because love is fragile. Fear is structural. Love depends on the other person's emotional state, their current circumstances, their perception of alternatives. Fear depends on your demonstrated capacity to impose cost. Love can be withdrawn on a feeling. Fear can only be withdrawn after you've lost the capacity to enforce consequences. Machiavelli continues, "Men have less scruple in offending one who is beloved than one who is feared, for love is preserved by the link of obligation which, owing to the baseness of men, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment, which never fails." This in layman means people will betray love when it's convenient. They won't betray fear unless they're certain you can't retaliate. Here's your mirror test. How many times have you relied on culture, on trust, on people doing the right thing because they care about you, only to watch them abandon ship the second things got difficult? How many employees left after you invested in them? How many partners reneged after you extended goodwill? You thought love would hold them. It didn't. Because love without enforcement infrastructure is just hope in a business suit. Stop optimizing for affection. Start optimizing for respect, backed by credible consequences. This doesn't mean being cruel. It means being clear. Establish boundaries. Communicate costs. Demonstrate, not threaten, demonstrate that violating those boundaries results in measurable, unavoidable consequences. The fear equation, consequence times certainty equals compliance. It's not the severity of the punishment that creates fear, it's the certainty of it. A brutal consequence that's inconsistently applied creates chaos, not compliance. A moderate consequence that's enforced 100% of the time creates order. Machiavelli's genius is that he's not advocating for tyranny. He's advocating for structural reliability. People don't fear tyrants because they're cruel. They fear them because the cruelty is predictable. You know what happens when you cross the line. That knowledge shapes behavior. Compare that to the loving leader who's inconsistent. Sometimes they forgive, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they enforce consequences, sometimes they let it slide. That's not love, that's chaos. People don't know where the boundaries are, so they keep testing them, and eventually the whole system collapses. Build a system where people know exactly what happens when they deliver, and exactly what happens when they don't. Don't make it personal. Make it atmospheric. Make it so reliable that they don't even think about testing it, because the outcome is already known. You're not trying to be loved. You're not trying to be feared. You're trying to be inevitable. Love is a bonus. Fear is architecture. The leader who confuses the two loses both, because they're too afraid to enforce boundaries, losing fear, and too inconsistent to be trusted, losing love. Machiavelli's final warning: nevertheless, a prince ought to inspire fear in such a way that, if he does not win love, he avoids hatred. Fear works. Hatred doesn't. The difference: hatred emerges when cruelty is random, excessive, or self-serving. Fear emerges when consequences are proportional, predictable, and impersonal. Be the equation, not the tyrant. Love is weather. Fear is climate. The sovereign controls the climate and lets the weather do whatever it wants. You think integrity is absolute. It's not. It's conditional. And the moment you realize this, the moment you understand that principles are tools, not religions, you stop being a liability to yourself and become asymmetrical. You've been taught that keeping your word is sacred, that consistency is virtue, that changing positions is weakness. That's sleeper programming. Machiavelli dismantled this delusion in Chapter 18 when he introduced the most lethal metaphor in strategic doctrine. The prince must be both fox and lion. The lion cannot defend itself against traps. The fox cannot defend itself against wolves. Therefore, the sovereign must know when to be which animal. Listen to his exact words. A wise lord cannot, nor ought he to, keep faith when such observance may be turned against him, and when the reasons that caused him to pledge it exist no longer. Read that again. He's not saying, never keep your word. He's saying, your word is an instrument, and instruments are selected based on context. When keeping faith serves your strategic position, keep it. When it doesn't, don't. The operative variable isn't morality, it's utility. The fox understands deception, misdirection, the art of appearing one way while operating another. The lion understands force, directness, the capacity to crush opposition through sheer overwhelming power. Most people are trapped in one mode. They're either always honest, predictable, exploitable, or always deceptive, untrustworthy, isolated. The sovereign toggles between them based on what the situation requires. Machiavelli continues, if men were entirely good, this precept would not hold, but because they are bad and will not keep faith with you, you too are not bound to observe it with them. There it is, the reality fracture again. You're operating in a world where most people will violate agreements the moment it's advantageous, but they expect you to remain bound by principle. That asymmetry is your cage. They get flexibility, you get rigidity. They adapt. You suffocate inside your own moral architecture. Here's your mirror test. How many times have you honored a commitment after the other party stopped honoring theirs? How many times have you stayed locked into a bad deal because you gave your word, even though the context that created that deal no longer exists? You weren't being noble. You were being exploited. The fox-lion synthesis isn't about lying. It's about situational integrity. It's about understanding that the world is not a fixed game with fixed rules. It's fluid, adversarial, evolving. And if your strategy is rigid while everyone else's is adaptive, you're not principled, you're extinct. Map your commitments. Identify which ones still serve your strategic position and which ones are fossils. Agreements made in a context that no longer exists, with partners who've already violated the spirit of the deal, in markets that have fundamentally shifted. Stop treating your word as a suicide pact. Renegotiate, withdraw, pivot, and when you do, frame it not as betrayal, but as adaptation to changed circumstances. The fox doesn't announce the trap, it simply avoids it. The lion doesn't justify its roar, it simply dominates. Machiavelli's critical insight. It is necessary to know well how to disguise this characteristic and to be a great pretender and dissembler. And men are so simple and so subject to present necessities that he who seeks to deceive will always find someone who will allow himself to be deceived. Translation: most people want to believe the performance. They want to trust the narrative. They'll accept your frame as long as you deliver it with confidence and wrap it in enough plausible reasoning. The sovereign doesn't lie compulsively. The sovereign controls the narrative. There's a difference. One creates chaos. The other creates leverage. You're not abandoning principles. You're selecting which principle applies in which context, based on what outcome you're engineering. Be the fox when traps surround you. Be the lion when force is required. Be neither permanently. The fox survives the trap. The lion survives the wolf. The sovereign is both, and the world never knows which one is coming. You can be feared. You can be ruthless. You can operate with cold precision. But the moment you become despised, the moment people see you as weak, indecisive, frivolous, or incompetent, your entire edifice collapses. Fear without respect is just tyranny waiting for the guillotine. Power without dignity is just a countdown to assassination. Machiavelli understood this in chapter 19 when he identified the two states a prince must avoid at all costs: being despised and being hated. These aren't the same thing. Hatred emerges from cruelty, from taking what belongs to others, from violating property and dignity. Contempt emerges from weakness, from being seen as effeminate, irresolute, cowardly, fickle. His doctrine: he is despised when he is seen as variable, frivolous, effeminate, cowardly, irresolute. From these qualities, a prince must guard himself as from a reef. Why does contempt destroy faster than hatred? Because hatred still acknowledges power. When people hate you, they recognize you as a threat. They organize against you, which means they're still taking you seriously. Contempt is worse. Contempt means they don't even see you as worthy of opposition. You're a joke, a placeholder, a puppet they'll remove whenever convenient. Hatred creates enemies. Contempt creates indifference. And indifference is the final stage before irrelevance. Here's the forensic breakdown. You can seize assets. You can impose harsh terms. You can even eliminate rivals. And as long as you do it with decisiveness, with strength, with strategic clarity, people will fear you. They might hate you, but they'll respect the lethality. But if you waffle, if you change your position based on the last person you talked to, if you delay decisions out of paralysis, if you try to please everyone and end up satisfying no one, you become despised. And once you're despised, even those who previously supported you will abandon you, because being associated with you becomes a liability to their own status. Machiavelli's critical warning: the best fortress is not to be hated by the people. Translation: all the security infrastructure in the world won't save you if your own population sees you as contemptible. Fortresses can be sieged, armies can be bought, but contempt, once it becomes atmospheric, is irreversible. Here's your mirror test. Do people take you seriously? When you set a deadline, do they believe it? When you draw a boundary, do they respect it? Or have you negotiated yourself into a position where your word is just background noise? Where people nod, agree, then do whatever they were going to do anyway because they've calculated that you won't enforce consequences. If you're constantly reminding people of your authority, you don't have authority. You have a title. There's a difference. Eliminate all signals of indecision. Stop seeking consensus on decisions that are yours to make. Stop telegraphing internal debate. Make the decision, announce it, execute it. If you need to adjust later, fine. But adjust from a position of strength, not waffling. Build the contempt firewall by demonstrating 3 things consistently: decisiveness, fast decisions executed completely. No hedging, no let me think about it on things you should already have frameworks for. Consistency. If you say X will happen, X happens. Not probably, not hopefully. It happens. Become the most reliable force in your ecosystem, not for love, but for predictability. Competence. Know your domain better than anyone in the room. Speak with precision. Eliminate filler words. Remove uncertainty from your language. When you don't know something, say, I'll get that information, and then actually get it. Machiavelli's final synthesis: one of the most powerful safeguards a prince can have against conspiracies is not to be hated by the people. Notice he doesn't say, loved. He says, not hated. The baseline isn't affection. It's the absence of the conditions that breed conspiracy. You avoid hatred by not seizing property arbitrarily, by not violating people's dignity publicly, by not making your cruelty personal or chaotic. You avoid contempt by never appearing weak, indecisive, or manipulable. The sovereign is feared but not hated, respected but not loved, inevitable but not despised. That's the zone. That's where empires are built and held. Hatred creates assassins. Contempt creates vacuums. The sovereign permits neither. You're still here. That's notable. Most people turned this off around Law 3. They got uncomfortable. They told themselves this was too dark, too cynical, not applicable to their life. They went back to their sleeper protocols, back to believing the world rewards fairness, back to operating in the reality fracture instead of closing it. You didn't, which means one of two things. Either you're already dangerous and you're auditing your doctrine against Machiavelli's to find gaps, or you're beginning to realize that the game you thought you were playing is not the game that's actually being played, and you're deciding whether to keep losing elegantly or start winning asymmetrically. Here's what I didn't tell you earlier, what the algorithm would bury if I led with it. These 8 laws aren't optional. They're already operational. Right now, in your industry, in your market, in your organization, someone is executing Law 1. They're identifying you as a future threat, and they're dismantling your leverage before you even know you're in a contest. Someone is deploying Law 2, weaponizing their vision while you're still asking for buy-in. Someone is using Law 7, toggling between fox and lion while you're trapped in one mode, wondering why you keep getting outmaneuvered. The laws don't care if you accept them. They're running in the background of every power structure, every market dynamic, every human hierarchy. The only question is whether you're conscious of them, whether you're applying them or having them applied to you. Machiavelli didn't invent these laws. He just had the surgical honesty to write them down. And for 500 years, people in power have read The Prince in private while condemning it in public. They'll call it immoral, dangerous, cynical, and then they'll execute every principle in it because they understand the difference between what you're supposed to say and what actually works. You now have the same choice they had. You can close this, go back to your comfortable narratives, keep believing that merit rises and fairness wins and good intentions create good outcomes. No one will judge you for it. Most people make that choice. It's safer, easier, more socially acceptable. Or you can enter the doctrine. You can start operating with the same clarity that built empires, toppled regimes, and separated the architects from the pawns. You can stop being surprised by betrayals because you've already modeled them. You can stop losing to people who aren't smarter than you, just more ruthless in their application of laws you refuse to acknowledge. The most dangerous truth is this: morality is a luxury afforded to those who've already secured power. Once you have it, you can be as virtuous as you want. But getting power, that requires seeing the world as it is, not as you wish it were. Machiavelli knew this. You know it now. In a world of noise, be the silence. In a room of performers, be the architect. The sheep will never understand the wolf, and the wolf stopped caring about their understanding the moment it learned to hunt. Don't subscribe because you enjoyed this. Subscribe because you've decided. This isn't entertainment. This isn't a motivational channel. This is a doctrine, and subscribing is a signal. To the algorithm, yes, but more importantly to yourself, that you've crossed the threshold. You're no longer operating in the sleeper framework. You're entering sovereign architecture. Every video on this channel is another layer of the operating system, another tool in the arsenal, another law in the doctrine. But it only works if you apply it. If you just consume this like content, you're still a mimic, performing intelligence without lethality, collecting insights without execution. The subscribe button isn't a transaction. It's a contract with your own capacity for asymmetrical operation. Most won't click it. They'll watch, nod, feel temporarily dangerous, then return to the same patterns that have been failing them for years. They'll tell themselves they already knew this or that it doesn't apply to their situation. That's the anesthesia talking. You're awake now. The question is whether you stay awake. Click subscribe, not for me, for the version of yourself that's been suffocating under sleeper protocols, waiting for permission to operate with the clarity, precision, and ruthlessness the world has been using against you this entire time. Welcome to Dark Veil Psychology. The architect doesn't build for the crowd. The architect builds for those who understand that empires aren't inherited, they're engineered.